If you were a regular traveler along State Route 16 in West Virginia in the second half of the 20th century, you would be very familiar with this billboard. The sign had become something of a famous landmark after it went up in the 1950s, and it stayed there for the next 40 years. It served as a desperate plea from a family that had suffered an unspeakable tragedy, one that they were never really able to get past or make sense of. 5 children gone missing following a fire that consumed their home, one that was set by an arsonist on Christmas Eve, no less. But did they die in the fire, as the police suggest? Or was it possible that they were kidnapped? Maybe by the arsonist who set the fire. The family never stopped believing that they were kidnapped, which might sound like wishful thinking, but as time went on, many clues pointed to this possibility, that they were all still alive. Reports of seeing the kids in other states, rumors of police corruption, even a photo of one of the kids years later. Older, but recognizable. It's become an enduring mystery with hot takes on all sides of it, so today, let's talk about the Sodder children mystery. So before I jump into this, let me just start by saying that this video is about a tragedy involving children, so there's some pretty heavy stuff in here. Obviously, I will cover it with as much tact and respect as possible, and this won't get gory or anything, but I just wanted to give you a warning. This might be a difficult subject matter for some of you. Also, you might see me adjusting some of the dialogue in this video to keep it from being demonetized. YouTube's been kind of ridiculous with that lately, so you might hear me bleeping out certain things. I'll tell you how you can see this uncensored at the end. Alright, so with all that out of the way, let's set the scene. The year was 1945 in Fayetteville, West Virginia, and George Sodder was the owner of a fairly successful trucking company that served the coal and freight industries in the area. He and his wife Jenny had 10 children, ranging in age from 2 to 23, all living in their home except for one who was away in the Army. They were Catholic, if that helps to explain the family size. So on the night of Christmas Eve 1945, they all went to bed with dreams of celebrating the holiday the next day. Visions of sugar plums and whatnot. At 12:30 a.m., the phone rang, and Jenny, the mother, answered it. She claimed to hear a woman's voice on the other end of the line, a voice she didn't recognize, and there was background noise that sounded like a party, so thinking it was a wrong number, she just hung up the phone. While she was up, she walked around the house to make sure everything was okay. The lights were on, one child was asleep on the couch, and it looked like the other children had gone to bed. Jenny did notice that the front door was unlocked, so she locked it and made her way back upstairs to her bedroom. She was then woken up at around 1 a.m. by a loud bang on the roof, followed by a rolling sound, like something had hit the roof and then rolled off of it. And then an hour later, smoke filled the house. George and Jenny jumped out of bed and rushed the children outside, but once they got out there, only 4 of the children were with them: Sylvia, George Jr., Marion, and John. The other 5 children were stuck in a room upstairs, so George rushed back into the house to try to save them, but at that point, the stairs were blocked by the fire. Meanwhile, Marion ran to a neighbor's house to call the fire department, but he couldn't get anybody to answer. This was way before 911, and Fayetteville had a volunteer fire department, and it was Christmas Eve. So the neighbor rushed to his car and drove around to find the fire chief, a guy named F.J. Morris. With the stairway blocked by fire, George tried to find other ways to get into the room, and he and one of the boys rushed to find a ladder that would get up to the second-story window, but the ladder they always kept at the side of the house was missing. George then tried to back his truck up to the house, thinking maybe he could stand on top of the truck and reach the window, but it wouldn't start. Actually, 2 different trucks he tried to start, and neither of them would start. At this point, there wasn't much for him to do, but just wait for the fire brigade to show up, which shouldn't have taken that long. The station was only 2.5 miles away, but for some reason, the crew didn't get there until 8 a.m. Jenny and George could only sit there helpless for 7 hours, watching their home burn to the ground, with their children inside. By the time the crew showed up, the house was reduced to smoke and ash, and the remaining Sodder children were nowhere to be seen. The fire investigators blamed the fire on faulty wiring and just assumed that the kids died in the fire, and their bodies were cremated. Those children were Betty, Jenny, Louis, Martha, and Maurice. This entire event was shrouded with questions and controversy, like why did none of his trucks start? What happened to their ladder? What was that bang that Jenny heard? And why did it take 7 hours for the fire department to show up? All of this was enough to make George and Jenny question, did the children actually the fire? There were a few things that made them think that maybe not. First of all, no remains were found of their children, no fire pattern that would indicate a burned body, no scraps of clothes left behind, and no bones. Not a single fragment of bone from 5 kids. Also, even though the investigators blamed faulty wiring, George had just had his home inspected just a few months before and was told that his wiring was fine. And they began to recall some other things that happened in the months leading up to the fire that seemed relevant to the situation, like the time a guy, threatened to burn down his house and children. Yeah, apparently an insurance salesman came by, and when George refused to buy life insurance from them, he flew into a rage and said, quote, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed." End quote. That sounds like the most intense insurance salesman ever, and you might just think that it was a scare tactic, a warning of what could happen if he didn't protect himself with insurance. But there was a second part to that quote, according to George Sodder. "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making against Mussolini." Yeah, see, there's something you kind of need to know about Fayetteville, West Virginia in 1945. It was a little fashy. Yeah, there was a huge Italian community in Fayetteville. It was a coal town. It attracted a lot of immigrant labor, and immigrants tend to cluster with other people that came from their home country. For whatever reason, Italians clustered there, including George Sodder. He was born Giorgio Sodder in Tula, Sardinia in 1895, and he immigrated to the U.S. in 1908. He started out on the Pennsylvania railroads, then moved to Smithers, West Virginia, and began working as a driver before starting his own trucking company that hauled dirt, freight, and coal. He later met Jenny Cipriati in a local store called the Music Box. She had immigrated to the U.S. when she was 3. So they got married, and like many other Italian immigrants in the area, they settled in Fayetteville. But as fascism began to spread in their home country and Mussolini came into power, many Italians in the U.S. embraced that ideology. They felt that fascism upheld traditions and rebalanced relationships between men and technology and restored connections between the people and the government. Besides, a lot of these immigrants weren't exactly welcomed when they got over here. You know how people are really cool about immigration? So yeah, after years of facing xenophobia and discrimination, this strong new Italy that Mussolini offered just gave him a sense of pride. But George was never on board with all this. He never really talked about his life in Italy, so we don't really know if he had a personal reason for this, but he severely disliked Mussolini, and he wasn't shy about it. This would often get him into heated arguments with community members, and it made him a few enemies, including that insurance salesman. But George didn't take the threat seriously. He also didn't take it seriously when he saw a stranger sitting in a car on the highway a few days before Christmas that was watching the younger Sodder children come home from school. They never figured out who that guy was or what he was doing. On December 29th, a funeral service was held for the children, but George and Jenny were too upset to attend. Soon after that, George wanted to create a memorial garden where the house was, so he had Jenny's brother fill in the basement with dirt using a bulldozer. And over the next couple of years, the Sodder family tried to just get on with their lives. They kind of half-heartedly accepted the story that faulty wiring started the fire, but then things changed in 1947. That year, an article was published in a magazine called Look that caught George and Jenny's attention. There was a photo in the article, and there were 7 children in the photo. And to them, one of the girls in the photo looked exactly like their daughter Betty. Yet the fact that no remains were ever found always left a question mark in their mind, and seeing this photo convinced them that maybe their children might be alive, that maybe this wasn't a fire at all. This was a kidnapping, and the fire was just a cover-up. If you remember from before, after she got that phone call, Jenny went downstairs and she assumed that the children had gone to bed, but the front door was unlocked. So there's a possibility somebody could have taken them. So they hired a private investigator to find the girl in the photo, but he wasn't able to track her down. Jenny actually started doing experiments with chicken and pork chop bones, basically burning them in a pan to see if she could make them reduce to ash, but she was never able to, repeat what had apparently happened in the fire. Also, there were some objects and furniture that survived in the nearby area, so it seemed like something of the kids would have been found. She even contacted a crematorium, and the employee there told her that bones remain after bodies are burned for 2 hours at 1,093 degrees Celsius, or 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But according to Jenny and George, the Sodder home burned down in 45 minutes. And besides all that, now stories were coming out of the woodwork of the children being spotted by people. One woman said that she saw them in a passing car while the fire was happening. Another woman at a tourist stop about 50 miles west of Fayetteville said that she saw them the morning after the fire. She told police that she had served them breakfast and that there was a car with a Florida license plate. And yet again, another woman said that she saw 4 of the 5 children at a Charleston hotel a week after the fire. She said 2 women and 2 men of Italian descent were with the children, and in a statement she said, quote, "I do not remember the exact date. However, the entire party did register at the hotel and stayed in a large room with several beds. They registered about midnight. I tried to talk to the children in a friendly manner, but the men appeared hostile and refused to allow me to talk to these children. One of the men looked me in the hostile manner. He turned around and began talking rapidly in Italian. Immediately, the whole party stopped talking to me. I sensed that I was being frozen out, so I said nothing more. They left early the next morning." At this point, evidence just seemed to keep mounting, so George and Jenny sent a letter to the FBI in 1947 asking for its help. And the agents said that they would help if the local authorities gave them permission. And the Fayetteville Fire and Police Departments did not give them permission. So the Sodders hired another private eye, and this guy found out some interesting stuff, like the fact that the angry insurance salesman that had threatened them was actually on the coroner's jury that said that the fire was an accident. Yeah, the same guy who threatened to destroy his children. And he also found out that there were actually human remains found, at least according to the fire chief. Yeah, the fire chief claimed that he had found a human heart at the scene. Okay, to me this is where things really get weird. Yeah, the fire chief had told the family that there weren't any remains, and that was what was on the official report. But what he told the private investigator was that he had found a heart. And instead of entering into evidence or telling anyone about it, he chose to put it in a box and bury it at the scene. So the private eye asked if he could point out where he buried this box, because of course there's no way this actually happened, right? Actually, it did. Yeah, the fire chief came over, he pointed out where he had buried it, so they dug around and found a box with something inside of it. They took it to a local funeral director, and it turned out that the heart was nothing more than beef liver. So this forced the fire chief to admit that he did put a fake heart in a box and buried it. He said that he did this to placate the family and give them a sense of closure, and of course, to get them to stop their investigation. Okay, so at this point, the Sodders were just all in on trying to get to the bottom of this, so they began a new search of the fire scene in August 1949. They excavated the basement and searched through the dirt with a fine-tooth comb, looking for anything that might be their kids. What they found were some damaged coins, a burned dictionary, and several shards of vertebrae, which they sent to the Smithsonian Institution. When they got the report back from the Smithsonian, it showed that it belonged to somebody 16 to 17 years old. But the oldest Sodder child that had burned in the fire was 14 years old. But the real kicker was that none of the bones had been exposed to fire. The report said, quote, "It is very strange that no other bones were found in the allegedly careful excavation of the basement of the house. One would expect to find the full skeletons of the 5 children rather than only 4 vertebrae." Also, how could every other bone in their body be burned down to ash, but these 4 vertebrae showed no exposure to fire whatsoever? So what they concluded, according to the report, is that the dirt that Jenny's brother used to fill in the basement back when George wanted to create a memorial for the children, that thing, apparently wherever he got this dirt from, it had human remains in it. Just some random guy. So yeah, that's like a whole other mystery. And this is when the Sodders put up that billboard on Route 16 with the children's pictures and offered a $10,000 reward for information. And information started coming in. They received a letter from a woman in St. Louis who said that Martha was in a convent there. Another tip from Florida said that the children were staying with one of Jenny's distant relatives. And George traveled all over the country investigating every single one of these tips, and he always came back with nothing. This went on for decades. And then in 1967, literally 22 years after the fire, Jenny received a letter in the mail. It was addressed to her, and it had no return address on there, but it was postmarked in Kentucky. Inside the envelope was this photo. A handwritten note on the back of the photo said, quote, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, Lil Boys, A90132 or 35. Louis was the name of one of the boys who died in the fire. He was 9 at the time, and the picture does bear a striking resemblance. Like, I gotta be honest, if somebody pointed me to these 2 pictures and said it was the same guy 20 years apart with no other context, I wouldn't think twice about it. I'd totally believe it. Of course, Louis didn't have a brother named Frank or Frankie, and the rest of the text on there, the numbers and whatnot, none of that made any sense to the Sodders. But they did think it could be him, so they hired another guy to track him down, and this private eye basically just took their money and didn't do anything. He was never heard from again. George died in 1969, and Jenny kept the billboard up and her hope alive for another 20 years before she died in 1989. Their children and grandchildren still continue this investigation. An investigation which has never actually been solved. So, there's really 2 questions here. 1, who started the fire? And 2, did the kids in the fire? As for the first question, it could have just been an accident. It was officially blamed on faulty wiring. That could be the case. I mean, yes, they did just have their house inspected, but inspectors aren't perfect. Plus, it was Christmas, so they may have had a lot of electrical lights plugged in and whatnot, maybe some candles burning. Actually, there is, every year, a documented spike in house fires during the holidays for this reason, so this might have just been another one of those. But George did make some enemies. And some of those Italian immigrants in Fayetteville were known to be part of the Sicilian mob, so yeah, some have expected that maybe they were involved. If it was a person who set the fire, maybe they threw an incendiary device on the roof, which would explain the noise that Jenny heard before the fire started. Or that phone call may have been someone checking to make sure they were home or distracting them while they were actually kidnapping the kids downstairs. Or it may have just been a wrong number. Now, the fact that that insurance salesman who had threatened them was also on the board that ruled that no foul play was involved, that's pretty sketchy, clearly. And the fact that the police and the fire investigators seemed unwilling to investigate it further and, refused to work with the FBI kind of hints at some corruption there. And as for the kids, the big question is, whether or not that house could have actually completely cremated their bodies. And the answer is possibly. So George and Jenny said that the house burned down in 45 minutes. But it smoldered for another 7 hours before the fire crew showed up. And according to the experts and the research that I did anyway, that could actually fully cremate a body. There were also reports that George had kept coal in his basement, so if that's the case, that would do it. Now, as for George's trucks not starting, at least one of George's trucks was kind of notorious for flooding the engine if you tried to start it too quickly, and I'm sure he was trying to start that thing as quickly as possible that night. Now, why the fire crew took 7 hours to show up is another big one. Now, it's easy to see collusion in that, but also it was Christmas Eve, and it was a volunteer fire department in 1945. They could have just been shitty at their jobs. As for all those reports that came in of sightings of the children with Italian immigrants, there were a lot of Italian immigrants around there, and they had a lot of kids. Now, there is a question around, after all these years, why none of these kids had ever contacted their parents. They were old enough to remember them. Some of them were teenagers. Some had suggested that maybe they had been told that if they contacted their parents, it would bring harm to their families. Maybe something worse happened. That photo of Lewis is pretty weird, though. It could have just been a hoax. People can be cruel. Anyway, there's endless debate about the fate of the Sodder children. As you guys know, I tend to think that the most mundane answer is usually the right one, so we might just be looking at an extremely tragic Christmas fire and heartbroken parents who couldn't cope with the loss. But there is plenty of room for doubt. There's a lot of weird stuff in this case. So I'll put it to you guys. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Okay, so throughout this video, you probably noticed that I was bleeping out certain violent words and editing around it, which I know is annoying. I know that because there are other channels that I follow that do it, and it drives me nuts when they do it. But I get why they do it. It's the same reason I just did it, because any kind of violent rhetoric can always set off the demonetization alarm, and that just kills your whole video. It happens all the time. And these darker videos tend to do well on this channel. Like right now, my #1 most watched video is the one about the worst human experiments of all time. And guess what? Limited monetization. I've literally missed out on thousands of dollars because of that. But that's just the nature of the beast on any platform that relies on ad revenue, which I'm not against the ad revenue model. It's very sustainable, but it'll always have limitations because you've got to keep the advertisers happy and make them feel safe. Twitter, anyone? But if you want to be able to say whatever you want without limitations, you need a subscriber model. And that's exactly what my friends and I have done over at Nebula. Nebula is a streaming service where we post everything that you see on YouTube, but without all the hoops. By hoops, I mean the hoops you gotta jump through in order to cater to YouTube. No censoring, no sponsor reads, no ads, just the videos we want to make. And that includes Nebula Originals, exclusive Nebula content, which can be everything from extra bonus content to companion videos to exclusive series, and now even feature films, including my original series, Mysteries of the Human Body, Real Science's amazing Becoming Human series, and Patrick Willems' feature film, Night of the Coconut. Did I mention we're doing feature films now? So yeah, Nebula's opening up a lot of opportunities for people like me to really do big, meaningful projects, and that's super exciting for me. It's like a catered playlist of your favorite science and educational creators with a lot of extra stuff you can't find on YouTube. And it's out earlier than YouTube. You can watch next week's video up on Nebula right now. And it probably has extra stuff on it. You can go look at it, right? It's there. Just go look. And it's all less than $3 a month. But for 1 month only, from now until the end of September, Nebula is offering a lifetime membership. Meaning you pay a one-time fee, and after that, you get Nebula for free until the day you die. Or an asteroid hits. Whichever comes first. It's $300, and I know that's not in everybody's budget right now, but if it is something you can swing, not only will you get the sweet goodness of Nebula, including Nebula classes, basically forever, but your investment will be used to fund some of these bigger dream projects I was just talking about. So if you ever wanted to help make a bunch of YouTubers' dreams come true, this is the opportunity you've been waiting for. The link to the lifetime membership is down below, and of course, if you just want to sign up for the regular membership, which is always appreciated, just go to nebula.tv/joescott. Anyway, go check it out. We'll treat you like an adult over there, and thank you ahead of time. All right, thanks a lot for watching. Please do like and subscribe if you like this video. I'll put another mystery video up here. We got a lot of different mystery videos we've done on this channel. People tend to like it. I've been kind of leaning toward it because they tend to do well, and I like telling stories, and that kind of fits into that genre. But you can look at that video. You can go look at any of the other videos that might show up on your sidebar. Go check them out, and if you enjoy them, I do invite you to subscribe. I do videos every Monday. All right, that's it for now. You guys go out there, have an eye-opening rest of the week. Stay safe, and I'll see you next Monday. Love you guys. Take care.